I ultimately dismantled a decade-long fraud that bilked my neighbors out of over $100,000. And it all started with a seemingly insignificant pile of wood. This story takes place a while back, between the spring of 2010 and the summer of 2012. My wife, Clara, and I had always been on the same page about one thing: after hearing endless horror stories, we would never, ever buy a house governed by a homeowners association. We value our privacy and have zero tolerance for busybodies telling us what to do with our own property. So when we finally found our perfect home, we did our due diligence. We checked and double-checked. We knew for a fact we were not in an HOA. As it turned out, we were right next door to one. Or so we thought. About a week after we moved in, there was a knock on our door. I opened it to find a woman with a practiced, overly bright smile. She introduced herself as Brenda, the president of the HOA, welcoming us to the neighborhood. We were polite, but confused. What HOA? We asked. Oh, we're the neighborhood behind you, she explained cheerily. Our HOA starts right at your property line. We exchanged pleasantries, and she left. Clara and I were genuinely shocked. We'd found the one person on an HOA board who wasn't a complete psychopath. It seemed our hopes for a peaceful life were secure. How tragically wrong we were. Our property line ran a perfect east-west, but the road in front of our house curved away, leaving a triangular wedge of green space between our yard and the sidewalk. We'd always been told this little sliver of land belonged to the HOA behind us, which was fine by us. It meant less for us to maintain. And that's where the trouble began. We have two absolutely massive trees in our yard, right on the property line, making them our responsibility. They're beautiful but a menace. Their limbs are incredibly heavy and prone to splitting off without warning. One particular limb, a huge, menacing arm of wood, stretched out over the street next to that HOA green space. It was a clear and present danger. A lawsuit waiting to happen. The thought of it falling and hurting or killing someone was something neither our conscience nor our insurance could bear. So, we did the responsible thing. We hired an arborist to take down the dangerous limb and clean out the deadwood from both trees. $1,400 later, the danger was gone. But we were left with a pile of large, heavy wood rounds. I had to leave town for work that weekend, so we neatly stacked the wood on the bark dust in the green space, completely out of anyone's way. It wasn't an eyesore or a hazard, just a temporary measure until I returned. The day I left, Brenda, the HOA president, came screeching into the scene. She pulled her car into our driveway, rolled down the window, and started screaming at Clara, who had just stepped outside. "You need to move that wood now. That's private property of the HOA. Move it now." Brenda had just made a critical mistake. In her fit of rage, she'd laid a verbal claim to a piece of land that would ultimately be the very thing to unravel her entire scheme. Clara is not a confrontational person. She's petite. And she was completely blindsided. She tried to explain that I was out of town and we'd move the wood the moment I got back the following weekend. That wasn't good enough for Brenda. She just kept shrieking. Humiliated and furious, Clara grabbed our wheelbarrow. She spent the next hour by herself, hauling that entire stack of wood, some rounds weighing nearly 100 pounds, around the fence and into our backyard. She was pissed. And when she told me what happened, so was I. When I got back, I walked over to Brenda's house. intending to have a calm, adult conversation about how she had treated my wife. I didn't pound on the door or raise my voice. But they refused to answer, even though we knew they were home. Cowards. The incident left a bitter taste. The next spring, the issue of that green space came up again. A large hedge planted there, which was never maintained, had grown so wild that it pushed over and broke 2 sections of our fence. I sent a polite email to Brenda, explaining that the HOA's hedge had damaged our property. Her response was swift and stunning: "It's not our hedge." I replied, "It's growing in your green space." "That's not our green space." She shot back. "Wait. What?" I typed back. "Then why in the world did you screech at my wife last summer when we had wood stacked there?" Silence. At that point, I patched the fence myself and started making some phone calls. I spent the next 2 weeks being bounced between 7 different county departments trying to find out who owned that strip of land. Finally, I reached the roads division. A very helpful gentleman there informed me that the green space was simply part of the public right-of-way for the road. No one owned it. "So, you're saying I can chop down that overgrown hedge that's knocking down my fence?" I asked. "Yep," he said. Then he paused. As an aside, he asked, "You mentioned an HOA for the properties east of you?" "Yeah? Well, part of what took so long to find your answer is that it turns out there is no HOA registered with the county there. We were looking in the wrong place entirely." This reveals Brenda's greatest fatal flaw, her absolute conviction that no one would ever bother to check. For 10 years, she was right. But her greed had finally made her sloppy. And she had picked a fight with the wrong person. I felt a chill go down my spine. "Wait. There's no HOA there?" "No," he confirmed. "Hasn't ever been one since that subdivision was built." Huh. Interesting. And just like that, a plot was hatched. We had made friends with a couple, Mark and his wife, who lived in the neighborhood behind us. They were completely fed up with Brenda and her antics. They told us how she acted as the neighborhood tyrant, bullying anyone she didn't like. And for the last 10 years, she had been collecting HOA dues from everyone. There were 36 homes in her HOA. She was collecting $300 a year from each of them. That's over $100. 000 she had collected in cash over a decade. For a non-existent HOA. And what did the neighbors get for it? A yearly potluck block party and some volunteer weed pulling. As one of the online commenters on my story would later point out, she had represented herself as a legal entity that didn't exist to collect fines and fees, which is all sorts of illegal. So, I did what any red-blooded American would do. I bought 36 envelopes and 36 stamps. I drafted a letter and printed 36 copies. It laid out my findings from the county, that there was not now, nor had there ever been, an HOA for their subdivision. It also laid out the math, that they had collectively paid over $100. 000 in fraudulent dues to a non-existent entity. Not to mention any bogus fines she might have levied. The neighbors, in turn, did exactly what you'd expect. They got together and sued the hell out of her for every single penny. And they won. There is no longer an HOA behind us. But the story doesn't quite end there. In my digging, I discovered something else. Brenda is a licensed real estate agent. In fact, she's the principal broker for her own agency. She had built her professional life on a foundation of rules and licenses, completely unaware that the very system she operated in was about to be used against her. I sent a detailed email to my state's real estate agency, laying out the entire fraudulent scheme. And as luck would have it, her license was up for renewal at the end of that very month. My report was going to put one hell of a speed bump in that process. My friend Mark and his wife are also now talking with other neighbors about pursuing criminal fraud charges. Ultimately, this whole ordeal proves that a single person, armed with the truth and a little bit of determination, can topple a petty tyrant built on a foundation of lies. Bullies and grifters only have the power you give them. And sometimes all it takes is one person asking the right questions to make their entire house of cards collapse. So, it makes you wonder, what would you do if you discovered a secret like this in your own neighborhood?